Hey, this is Jeff Waters from the Canadian metal band Annihilator, and you're listening to the one and only Target Audience Magazine with Better Be Sharp.
A suicide society, we've all gone bloody mad. Welcome to the dark side, the human race, crumbling before us, ending in disgrace.
There's also a very hopeful song at the end of the album, which is called Every Minute. But I found that to be really kind of inspiring. Like, listen, there's always time to turn it around or do something right. So
yeah, that one was kind of, again, I didn't know if I really said exactly what it was about in the lyrics. It's one of those like, oh, should I be a little more direct on that one? Even though it's a very sort of general thing. But where that directly came from was I was watching a documentary on TV. And I'm sure some people have seen these kinds of documentaries where they take a camera and they follow a person around.
Uh-huh.
This particular person had cancer and was healthy and just got diagnosed and started carrying the camera around. And it followed that person through treatments and right up until her death. And it was like you're watching it and you're going, do I really need to sit down and watch this? You know, it's like I got things that positive I should be doing, and I just got glued to this thing, and then I started getting, of course, emotional. Like, you know, when you see something that you're just like, God, geez, you know, like you're watching TV and you see starving children, or you see something that you really should feel sad about. I just couldn't stop watching this 2-hour documentary, and by the time it got to the end, this poor lady died, of course, but her last words were, I know most of you that will actually watch this thing. I've heard this forever, but you never know this until this is happening to you or somebody close to you, and you have to take hold of that phrase, live every minute, like it's, you know, your last minute or last day or whatever. And we've heard that, all of us have heard that forever, and you just, you know, if you're healthy and your life's pretty good, you just don't even care about stuff like that usually. But it's just something where you stop and you realize it's absolutely true. You can't. Most people don't live for the minute or the day, you know, like it's your last day. No, I don't know anybody that lives like that. But you just got to be careful what you're doing. Be safe. Be better to people. You know, try to be better to yourself and stuff like that. And it's like, I'm not preaching or anything, but same thing with Suicide Society. It's another observation about things around us, and that it's not preaching. It's not. I don't know a lot about a lot of things. You know, politics. I'm not well educated. You know, I'm not a poet. I don't want to preach. I don't know enough about politics to find a way out of anything. But I like bringing things up that I see on TV or things that happen around me.
Well, Jeff, it sounds like you're doing fine to me as far as all those categories go.
Yeah, I know.
Are you familiar with Warren Zevon?
I know the name, I know who he is, but I don't really know.
Well, I mean, if you didn't grow up listening to him, then I guess it's kind of hard. I mean, he was a guy along with like Jackson Browne and the Eagles in the 70s and
yep. That part I know, but I'm not familiar much with his music.
Well, anyway, it was kind of what you were talking about with the song and the woman being followed around that had been diagnosed with cancer.
Right.
He found out very late into his process that he had cancer, and he was on Letterman. And at that point, they knew it was terminal. And so he was like, well, how can you be so positive? You know you're going to die. And he's like, well, you just live your life. And he's like, this kind of experience just makes you realize you need to enjoy every sandwich. And that was kind of the phrase that like stuck with Letterman and everything. But it reminds me of what you're talking about there, and living kind of the fullest, even if you can't live your life every day as if you're going to die. That would be crazy.
Exactly, and sometimes there's something, little things like one thing that I stopped doing a few years ago was running downstairs and even running upstairs. I used to run downstairs like until I was 44, 45 years old. Wherever there was stairs, I would go down fast because it was like stairs were like, okay, an obstacle. I need to go from here to here, but there's stairs, so I'll just run down them fast. And one day I fell and landed on my butt, and I literally was paralyzed, I thought, for about 5 seconds. I just sat there, completely tingled, and I sat at the bottom of the stairs, and in that 5 seconds, I think I was okay, that was it. I never, ever run downstairs again after that incident because I realized that could have been the one time I landed on my butt and been paralyzed. And that could have changed my entire life and my kid's life and everybody else's life around me. And little things like that, if you just make those little, safety things, slowing down a bit in the car, which actually I'm bad at, so I've been working at that. But just little things like that are big deals. And that is, I think that even qualifies as having something to do with what he was saying and what I was saying. And this live me every minute kind of thing is like, be careful is another way you can look at that too.
Right, but not overly cautious, because you do want to enjoy your life.
True, exactly. But then you can apply that to drugs and alcohol and different things like that too, right? Some people will say, "Yeah, enjoy yourself, go have fun, and go drink that bottle of champagne or go get drunk." And then some people would say, "Well, enjoy yourself. Don't get yourself sick. Don't get yourself a headache. Don't poison your body. Don't not deal with things by getting drunk." Right? So they're to each his own, right? But I didn't even know we're getting really sidetracked here, but it's pretty cool.
I do want to ask, are we running out of time here? I have more questions, but I don't want to...
Oh, no. Well, it's funny because today was a gear day here at my house. I just moved into a place in May and built a recording studio at the very end of the house, and it was it's a rehearsal Romana recording studio, and we just moved in May, but I've been doing videos and press trips overseas and 6 festivals, played Wacken Festival and some other awesome festivals in Europe, and we've been doing rehearsals, and we lost a singer, we got a new singer, me, new endorsement things and new gear, and so all this stuff's been happening since I moved into this new place. And the guys just flew in today and came in today to start rehearsing tomorrow, the next day, and for a European 2 months we're going to do. But it's just been crazy here, but we're totally getting psyched on the reaction to the new record overseas, and that it's even getting some acknowledgement here. Hey, by the way, the new Slayer album, if you obviously heard it, it's kick-ass, and there's a couple of Maiden songs off the new one that's amazing too. Slayer, Slayer, it's the same thing. Annihilator's never gonna have a Never Neverland, but Slayer ain't gonna have a Rain in Blood. But I tell you, they got to be commended. Kerry King and Tom Araya for, of course, Bostoff and the solos that Kerry let Gary Holt do, but just the sound of the drums on the record and the vibe that I'm getting off that record. I bought it 2 days ago, and I'm just cranking it around the house, and my gal's not so much into heavy stuff, and she loves the record. I'm like, are you kidding me? You love it too? So I'm really getting into it. It's got a lot of things. The more you hear it, it's got a lot of cool nods to a lot of different Slayer eras of their stuff, and I'm loving this stuff now. I think they really, obviously they had a lot of inspiration with Jeff Hanneman passing, but
right.
On secondary, I'm sure Kerry had a lot of pressure or felt pressure that I want to continue doing what I love to do, and there's going to be pressure on me to continue this on, and I think he came through flying colors. It's a killer record. I'm loving it.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, aside from Suicide Society coming out, what other records that you were really excited about?
Well, the only ones that have been on my brain lately are Slayer and Maiden, and not just because my album's coming out at the same time, 1 week later, or whatever it is. It is 1 week later. Ours comes out this Friday. I almost forgot. I'm too busy thinking about touring right now. But and then again, think about it. I wrote and recorded this record almost entirely by December 2014. We're now coming up to the middle of September 2015. So for me, the new album coming out is really that old thing I did way back. So
right, you're overdue.
Yeah. It's like, hey, I need to do another album quick. But it's kind of like the Slayer and Maiden albums. To me, I know it might sound cheesy, but they're important as hell right now, because if Maiden did a shitty album or Slayer had done a shitty album, I think I could have given up almost all hope on the old schoolers in one sense. And I'm hoping Priest come out with a raging album, like just a brutal good one, and I hope they get to where Maiden and Slayer are. I think on the next one would be amazing for metal again, right? Hey, Priest did it. Priest took 14 records after those brilliant records they'd done, British Steel, Hellbent for Leather, Killing Machine, whatever, even Point of Entry, but they had, and Turbo was a different style, but you go back to Sin After Sin, Stay in Class, you go to all those early ones, and just the genius stuff that came out. And then all of a sudden, 14 records later, Judas Priest puts out the monster Painkiller. It's just phenomenal that in history that has been done by them.
Yeah, I mean, Painkiller's just hit his 25-year anniversary, or?
Yeah, it was out in 90, so.
Yeah, 25 years.
That was, and we were lucky because Glenn Tipton asked Annihilator to come on tour for that record, and that was their biggest tour, their biggest biggest everything. That was like the most powerful drum intro in history of metal, and the most powerful screaming banshee vocals ever done, and just brutality. And then you got someone like Glenn Tipton doing this super long shredding guitar solo that he hadn't really done before in the heavier style. He'd done Beyond the Realms of Death, where he went on for minutes and minutes playing a solo, but a guy named Scott Travis joins up from Racer X.
Oh, I love Racer X.
And bang, so did Glenn Tipton, and all of a sudden he's like, this Paul Gilbert guy, holy crap. And if you look at, as a lead guitar player, if us lead guitar players listen to Glenn Tipton before the Painkiller album, it was a Glenn Tipton blues, amazing style. And all of a sudden Painkiller comes out, and now you have the Paul Gilbert influence. So in 1 year or 1.5 years, some kid named Paul Gilbert had the power musically to, without knowing it, to change Judas Priest's guitar solos. You know, it was just a phenomenal thing that happened in history that people didn't see, that the older guy, Glenn Tipton, who was already a legend a dozen albums over, comes out with Painkiller because of a younger kid's guitar playing. You know, it's just, that was the end of a great era, actually, right around that time, when Rust in Peace came out and some other great things. But I have no idea what I'm going to say. I really wasn't listening to much metal before. Slayer and Maiden got me really back into it. When I say much metal, I always listen to metal, but it's always the older stuff, you know?
Oh, and modern things.
Yeah, well, there's been hope. I mean, for me, like, you know, when I saw Lexi Leo and Bodum come up years ago, and even the Trivian dudes, Corey and Matt, we toured with them for a few months in Europe in 2007, and I'd be in our dressing room, and I'd walk over to theirs, you know, get some lunch at catering around noon or 1, and I'd look in the dressing room and say hi, and these guys are jamming away. Hey, Jeff, can you come in and show us a lick or a scale? And then I'd show them something. I'd take off, eat. I wouldn't even practice. I'd come back 2-3 hours later, and they're still in there practicing different licks and stuff like that. And Alexi Leho and guys like that were, I thought, and of course they are, guys like that were the beginning of the comeback of musicians and guitar players, basically guitar players, realizing who Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, Glenn Tipton, who all these brilliant guitar players were in the 80s and 70s. And guitar players had just come out of the 90s where people could dye their hair and jump up and down like Flea from the Chili Peppers and learn 3 chords and come right out of school and be Blink-182 style bands and just play really sloppy 3 chords. And they could get record deals and get on the radio and you know, be a rock star. But you didn't have to sit there and do 14 or 10 years worth of 8 hours a day learning how to really play that guitar and really learn this stuff. So guys like Alexi and Matt and Corey and all these other kids were coming up, and they figured it out. They went, who's this Wasp band? Who's these, you know, and they were going through all these simpler rock bands to the Randy Rhoads and the, you know, Matthias Yabs from the Scorpions and Michael Schenker. And these guys were listening to this stuff and realizing we can't learn this in 5 minutes. We have to actually spend 5 years to learn this stuff. So that was my biggest light of hope around the year 2003 or 4 or 5 or 6, was when I saw those type of bands coming up. But I generally kind of lost interest in a lot of stuff, and I really was not so much into the, well, what they always coined the phrase Cookie Monster vocals a decade ago, right?
Right.
That kind of stuff, I can appreciate the music behind it and some of the vocals, but it just became too easy for people kids to say, I want to be a singer, and then they would go, rah, and scream and want to be Phil from Penn. Terra. They would try to be Phil from Pantera, and instead of trying their own thing. And to me, I didn't get it. I was like, haven't you guys heard of Rob Halford? Haven't you heard of Dickinson and Dio and David Lee Roth and Bon Scott? And you know what I mean?
Right.
So,
yeah.
Anywho, I can go on forever. So I'd kind of been out of the newer metal bands. I mean, I did get into the Bodems and the Arch Enemies and even the Lamb of Gods, and Redneck came out, and I was like, hey, this is kind of like Pantera, and this could be the big band. And I went through it hoping to find that Slayer, that Maiden, that the next bigger thing that was going to really move this metal scene forward, and we just haven't got there yet. We haven't got it. You've got your Avenged Sevenfolds, you've got your Bullet for My Valentine, you've got all this stuff that's more poppy and more radio and more major label and more successful, but you don't have the band or the bands that are coming out like Slayer, like any of those bands. I don't mean playing 80s music. I'm talking about the band that comes out and makes like when Appetite for Destruction finally hit after it was out for half a year. That kind of impact where you've got a band of any genre just blowing your head off in rock and roll and metal. I just can't think of any. We're looking to the old schoolers, and they're slowly coming to the end, So we need some saviors out there, young kids.
Now you guessed it on Fozzy's Chasing the Grail, right?
Yeah, I think that was quite a few years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a little while ago, but you did Martyr No More and
Yep.
And God Pounds His Nails and contributed solos to that. How was that experience, even though it was a while back?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I knew Chris from years ago back. I was in Vancouver with Annihilator for about 18 years. I was living there. And Chris would go to Vancouver, and before he was famous in the WWE, he would live in Vancouver and fly over to Japan to wrestle. I didn't know him, but he knew of Annihilator, and he was always trying to find us in Vancouver because he was quite young, total metal fan. And I don't know how young he was. He must have been 20 or something. He must have been really young. Annihilator had a few albums out at least, and I don't know if I ever ran into him there, but finally one day I was looking for a drummer, and I ended up hiring a drummer whose best friend was Chris. So that's kind of how it worked. Chris and I finally hooked up and hung out and became friends, and Chris is friends with everybody. He's got his radio and his wrestling and his music, and he's a very social and public and type of guy, but off outside of all that you see him, he's actually just a fantastic dude. He's just a really nice guy.
Yeah.
So he said, "Hey, do you want to play?" I think I asked him to sing on one of my songs on the record, or one of our records years ago, but he was busy doing something else, and yeah, that's about it. He just sent me some files and said, "You want to play solo?" It's kind of weird, eh? You get some bands ask you to do stuff, and literally now it's just send an MP3, you go in your studio and you play a solo in front of a couple speakers, and you email it back, and it's a weird experience. And all of a sudden now it's like, oh yeah, you were on their album, and you were on their album, but it's like, yeah, I emailed the MP3 back, yes.
Well, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like the development of technology where you don't have to be in the same room, you don't even have to be able to see the other person, they just send you the music and you play along and send it back. Do you feel like that's depersonalizing the experience of being on that album, or is that just kind of...
Well, to do with that stuff, yes, but who in the hell has the money to fly the guy out, pay him a couple of bucks for his food and transportation? Like... Even the bands, the medium size and the slowly getting bigger bands, they're making a really good living. I mean, they're doing that because they're not stupid with their money, and they're putting it back into their business or to keep things going. I mean, they're not doing it to... Most bands I know that are doing okay, most of them are not doing it because they just want money and they don't give a shit about the fans and all this stuff. Most of the time, you can get caught publicly being grumpy or making a reference or looking like a rock star or looking like you want this or that, and it's not all about the music. But mostly, of course it's because of the music, and it's different. In the old days, I think the fourth record I did called King of the Kill, I remember we were dropped from Roadrunner, and I had $250,000 in my bank account 6 months later from two record companies, one in Europe, Music for Nations, and one in Tokyo, in Japan. $250,000 just for those two record deals and two publishing deals in those territories. And I mean, that, it's a shitload of money. I mean, that's a lot of money. You bought a house, built a recording studio. Woo-hoo, right? But you have to remember, that is the end of the boom where there was all this money running in, and most bands didn't take care of their business. I didn't when I was younger for the first 3 albums with Roadrunner. I had a manager that sort of did everything for me and a lot more, I guess. And I didn't know anything about the business side, and therefore the three big records that we had, I didn't really see anything from that. But on that fourth one, I started wanting to learn about this stuff, and that was the time when slowly everything went down. So you get $250,000 on a record called King of the Kill, where they give it to you to make a record. They don't care what you do with the money. Take the money, give us a good record back. And that's what I did. I gave them a record, and it was a successful record. Now let me see, what are we now, 20 years later after that record? That came out in 95, so 20 years later now, most bands that are starting out, that are signing to an independent record, will be lucky to get $25,000 versus $250,000. And I would say not even $25,000. I know a lot of deals that I put together for other bands, they're lucky to get $10,000 US dollars or 10,000 euros off their debut record. Therefore, way back to answering what your question was, is some things may be impersonal, and the technology may ruin a lot of feel recordings and writings and things like that, but I think it outweighs, it's just a kind of like a result of the way the business has gone from the very early 90s to now. There's no money in it unless you either sold records in the past or are currently doing it now or bringing a hell of a live crowd in and you're not messed up on booze or dope and you're taking care of your business. You don't have the money. So, yes, albums could be much better if everybody came together and jammed like a real band back in the 80s and that. If we could all afford to do that, that would be perfect. But a lot of times we end up using drum recording software because you can't afford the $20,000 to hire a great drum engineer and a good drum studio and bring the drummer in for the $20,000 drum tracks. People say, oh, you can do records for drums for cheaper than $20,000, but actually without the use of computers, no, you can't. You need to spend money to do the drums properly if you're going to use a real drummer. So a lot of bands can't afford that. They can't afford $20,000 or $15,000 just for drums, or even $10,000 for drums. So the advent of the computer technology is fantastic for where the state of the business is. If it was booming like the old days, then that would suck because you'd have all this money and you should get together as a band and do your... You know what? I can go forever, dude. We can talk till midnight. I can see. I love doing this, eh? Can you tell?